Hey, good morning. Come on up. Okay. You are juror number 3, correct?
Yes, I am.
All right, and we are going to just refer to you by your number. And so the first thing I'm going to do is swear you in, so make sure that all your questions are answered under oath. So if you could raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that you will truthfully answer all questions about your qualifications to serve as a juror?
Yes.
All right, thank you. Now, we want to make sure that you speak right into the microphone so that we can hear your voice. And also, we tend to, in jury selection, get into kind of a conversational tone. And so you'll have a tendency to, like, interrupt the questions with affirmation, like, or to answer with, mm-hmm. We can't really do that because our court reporter needs yes and no answers. And also, you cannot talk over each other. So it happens because, like I say, it becomes kind of a conversation. In normal conversation, we do interrupt each other, talk over each other. But let's try and avoid that if we can in this case. So you filled out a questionnaire. And the first question I have is there anything you wanted to add or modify? Because sometimes people fill out the questionnaire, and then in reflection, they realize there was something they probably should have put in there. Is there anything that comes to mind regarding that?
Not off the top of my head. It was a while ago, and I think I filled it out to the best of my ability at the time, and I don't know that that's changed.
Okay. If, while one of the attorneys is questioning you, you do have something that comes to mind, you'll feel free to offer that. Now, you're not supposed to read any articles, and you're supposed to avoid media about this case, and that's what it said in the questionnaire. Since the questionnaire has advised you to avoid any media coverage of this, have you inadvertently been exposed to any media? And by that I mean, it's not your fault if you see a headline, mm-hmm. or maybe somebody talks to you about it, says, "Oh, did you hear?" And mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Is there anything like that has happened since the questionnaire? And now, as you sit here in court?
A couple headlines, and to be super specific, Instagram stories that have been shared or Instagram posts that have been shared, but they're all fairly high level, not anywhere near like the depth of an article.
Okay, do they talk at all about the substance of the case or the procedures or the participants, anything like that?
Not particularly. I've seen the charges that are being brought at a high level, no further than what their titles are, I suppose. And then... Pretty
much what I said today?
Yeah, exactly. And then additional information about kind of the timeline of the case, so when jury selection was beginning, when the actual proceedings are going to begin, that kind of stuff.
Okay. Do you think you could put all that aside? Because, as you notice, we asked you, what have you read about or heard about the case? Because we recognize that people have heard about this case. Mm-hmm. The question becomes, can you decide the case only on what you hear in the courtroom?
So aside from what I've heard since my questionnaire, am I willing to put the headlines aside?
Everything you've heard before. Because you have to essentially be the blank slate, and mm-hmm. It's okay to come in with some knowledge about the case. It's okay to even have opinions. It's even okay to have strong opinions about the case. But as a juror, you have to put all that aside. Some people will say, no, I can't do that. I've got these very strong opinions. I cannot put them aside. I cannot be, and very honestly, say they can't be fair and impartial. Some people, even with strong opinions, can say, I understand my role, and I feel I have the self-discipline to be able to do that, to put aside what I've heard before, decide just what I hear in court, and to follow the law, which obviously comes from the court. Mm-hmm. Do you think you could do that?
I definitely fall into the bucket of strong opinions.
Okay, and I noticed that on your questionnaire. Yeah, there were some.
Definitely have strong opinions about the case. I think I could try to be impartial. I don't know that I can promise impartiality just based on my opinions and personal experiences. I don't know that that could be promised.
Okay. And I appreciate that's a very honest answer. And we put you in a tough spot because we say, you know something about the case, but even what you know, we're asking you to put aside. And to some extent, can a bell be unrung? all those kind of concepts. And we put you in a tough spot and say, now tell us whether you could be fair and impartial. We recognize that that's a tough spot to put you in. But we actually, you know yourself better than any of us. Do you think when it comes right down to it, that you could do it?
I don't think so.
Okay. And tell me a little bit more about that.
I think in this case, there's very clear action that was taken. And I think regardless of what kind of dress you put the action in, it happened. And so regardless of what charges are brought or what evidence is brought, I think there's already too much that has happened and too much that is just cold hard fact that cannot be ignored.
Okay. So let me put it one last way. As a juror, you can't be hoping or yearning for a certain result over another. And because if you are, either way, you shouldn't be a juror because that's not being impartial. And it's not a character flaw, it's just, you know, based on what you've seen and heard. And that's
Understood.
So do you think that's still the case, that you probably?
Yeah, I think I definitely hope for a specific outcome, and I don't know that that would change.
Okay. Any inquiry from the defense? Well, let me just see if the defense or the state has any inquiry. You may.
Only as to this issue?
Only on this issue, please.
Yes, sir.
Morning.
Good morning.
Juror number 3. Would you agree that there are two sides to every story?
Yes.
And if you were called upon to be a juror in this case, you would have to decide and be able to promise the judge that whatever opinions that you may have formed, whatever you believe may be the case, you would have to put that aside and decide the case based solely on the facts that are before you. And that's just how the legal system works. Do you understand that?
Understood.
And oftentimes people come into this courtroom, they have disputes about what happened, and you can have some sort of preconceived notion about the way you think it ought to come out or what maybe actually happened. Would that be fair?
Yes.
But would you also agree that it's really not until you hear all of the evidence and see everything for your own eyes and have people put that into context for you that you really know and can make a decision one way or the other?
I think that's fair. I think at this point, it would be interesting to understand how the evidence is different than what has already been kind of played out in the news and media coverage of everything that's conspired since late May last year. I think it would definitely sound and feel different in a courtroom just based on different people giving you the evidence, different motivations, but I think a lot of it has already been exposed, if you will, and so hearing it a second time or in a different way, I don't know if that would change.
Would you agree that you would need to hear everything that happened before you could finally decide a case, though?
Yeah, I would agree with that.
And so when we talk about some of the media that you've been exposed to, I think you said that there are some Instagram stories that have been shared, right? Probably saw some things on the news. The video footage, correct? And when you're looking at these bites on the news, fair to say this happens in 30-second to 60-second increments?
Correct.
And I believe the judge instructed everyone that they could expect to anticipate this trial after it begins to last somewhere in the neighborhood of 4 weeks, right? And so if there's the ability to fill up 4 weeks with evidence, that's significantly longer than probably what you've been exposed to in the news. Would you agree?
I would agree.
And so just knowing that, knowing how much more is out there, how many more witnesses they are to hear from, how, all of the testimony that could comprise a case, would you at least acknowledge that, maybe you haven't heard everything to this point?
I would agree that I have not heard everything. However, are there repeated stories, I guess, from folks? Are things really that novel that people are saying? I guess I would not debate that, but be interested to see how kind of novel the hundreds of witnesses' recollections actually are, or if it'll just be kind of repetitive.
So there'd be two parts to the trial, right? There's what happened, and that would come from the witnesses who would testify, the evidence you would see. And then there's, well, what does it mean? And that would come from whatever the judge instructs you that it means, right? These are the elements of the different crimes charged, and you'd have to take a look at those and try to decide whether the facts that were presented fit these elements. And of all the coverage that you've heard, I'm assuming you've heard nothing in terms of, you know, what the law actually is. Fair?
That's fair. I guess I know the difference between, don't quiz me, but I know tentatively the difference between second degree and third degree murder.
Okay. I won't quiz you.
Okay, amazing.
All right, and I appreciate your candor here today. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Juror number 3, I'm going to excuse you from this case, so you don't have to serve on it. I appreciate your candor, because, and I don't want you to feel that you have not done your duty. Your duty was to tell us the truth and be candid in this case. So we do appreciate everything, the work you put into the questionnaire and your willingness to answer questions today. So you can go with the deputy and we'll proceed at that. You'll have to leave the letter with the deputy once you leave with him. Okay?
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Greg, grab him in the hallway and say, hold off a minute. All right, that was the court's excusing juror number 3 for cause. One thing I was trying to convey when juror number 2 was coming in, I think you may have noticed there are certain people who, if you follow up too closely to what's in their questionnaire about their background, for example, there was one who was had a job title that person was easy to find on the internet, and if we talk about that in open court, I'd like it to be generalities to protect their anonymity. In fact, there might be a couple like that from what I've seen. So just to keep that in mind about try and stay as general as possible to protect the anonymity of the jurors. With that, I think we can go to number 4. And remember, we're going to go until 12:30.
I'm sorry, Your Honor?
12:30 is when we're going to end. Okay, come on up. Morning.
Good morning.
You are juror number 4, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
All right, the court reporter is going to love the fact that you have a nice loud voice.
Awesome.
So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to swear you in so that all your answers are under oath. So if you could raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that you will truthfully answer all questions about your qualifications to serve as a juror?
Yes, sir.
All right. First of all, you filled out a questionnaire and submitted it to the court. Thank you for taking the time to do that. Is there anything on there that you want to change or add to? Because sometimes people fill out the questionnaire and they realize, I should have talked about this, or that wasn't quite accurate. Doesn't get you into trouble.
It's been about a couple of months. My memory's not too refreshed with it. I did fill it out to the best of my knowledge at that time.
Okay.
Would I be able to glance over it one time?
Well, actually, I think the lawyers will kind of draw out things.
Okay. Well, I'm glad to, go over it with them.
Okay, and they'll be asking you some questions, I'm sure. Couple things is you have some exposure to the facts of this case, as I think is true of everyone.
Yes, sir. It was a
okay,
national thing.
Yeah, and since you got your questionnaire, which said from now on avoid any media coverage, have you been exposed to any media coverage? Because sometimes it can happen inadvertently, like you see a headline or a friend says, "Oh, did you hear about A, B, and C?" Kind of a spoiler alert.
Pretty much besides what you guys sent me saying that I'd be doing my civic duty here. No, I really don't follow it. The only things I've been seeing is just COVID related stuff. If I do see any news outlets or anything, I work pretty much day and night, so I just keep busy with that.
Okay, fair enough. Now, you have some knowledge of the case, but if you are on the jury, you have to decide the case just on the information you hear that's admitted into evidence. And you have to kind of put aside anything you've heard outside the courtroom or might even hear outside the courtroom going forward. You have to kind of put that aside, not kind of, you do have to put it aside.
Yes, sir.
Just decide the case on the facts you hear here and apply the law that I give you.
Yes, sir.
Do you think you could do that?
Yes, sir.
In doing that, you have to be fair and impartial, which means
Strict to the facts.
stick to the facts and not lean one way or the other. Do
Yes,
you think
sir.
you could do that? Okay. Did you recognize any witnesses on the list that we gave you?
No, sir. I'm originally from Southern California. I moved here about 3 years ago, and I'm not too familiar with anybody in this area.
So you moved from Southern California to Minnesota.
Yes, sir. Unfortunately.
I mean, did we sneak it in by having you move in the summer and not in the winter?
No, I moved in November. I came here in October, and yeah, it was a warm welcoming, to say the least.
Okay, now, there were some answers in your questionnaire about, I think, maybe the length of time. If you were on this jury, you would be free to go about your business until March 29th. And then it would probably be 4 weeks of trial that you would have to attend, and then obviously deliberations. And there were some, I think, maybe some work concerns you expressed.
Yes, I do have some work concerns, but if they feel that I'm the best fit for this case, I would be more than interested in doing my duty.
Okay. You think you could resolve any work difficulties and serve on this case?
Yes, sir.
All right, thank you. All right, what I'm going to do then is I'm going to turn it over to the attorneys, but with a couple of cautions. When we start talking like this and with the attorneys, it gets conversational and sometimes we talk over each other or we use mm-hmm. Let's try and stick to yes and no because the court reporter needs to take down exactly what we're saying, and also try and avoid talking over each other.
Yes, sir.
And to be honest, not these lawyers, but historically, it's the lawyers who tend to violate that and start talking over you. These lawyers have been very good about not doing that, but try not to talk over each other so that we have a good record of what we're doing today.
Good deal.
Do you have any questions?
No, sir.
And I think you can pull your mask down if you'd like to
Awesome.
be able to answer the questions, because we do have the plexiglass and I'll keep my mask on. So with that, Mr. Nelson, you may inquire.
Thank you, Your Honor. I apologize for coming up to the podium a little early. I should say good morning, sir.
Good morning.
How are you today?
I am doing great. Thank you for asking. How about yourself?
I'm well, thank you. A little busy, but I'm well.
Likewise.
So here's what I'd like to do is I just kind of want to ask you some pretty general questions first, get to know you a little bit, and then I'm going to follow up with some questions about some of the answers you gave on your questionnaire. And I understand you haven't seen it or read it in a while. I'll refresh your recollection as we go through that, okay?
Yes, sir.
Fair enough?
Fair enough.
Okay. So let's assume, sir, that you and I met in some social circumstance, a party, whatever. What would be 2 or 3 things you would want me to know about you after I walked away?
Just, the good nature and just, pretty much I'd want you to know I'm a good person and just fun, outgoing, and I mean well. That's
Good.
pretty much it,
Yeah, you seem like an outgoing guy. Do you have any particular interests, hobbies, things you do in your spare time?
I follow sports briefly. Really, work's been my main go-to. I was doing some kickboxing in Minneapolis for a little while, but lately work's been so hectic that I haven't done that. But other than that, no, not really. I haven't been the best at adapting to Minnesota yet.
I understand. Without divulging any personal information, as far as family members or names or anything, was there something particular that brought you here to Minnesota from Southern California?
To chase more opportunity, I was from a small town in Southern California, and Minnesota was referenced as a place where I could better my situation, so I came out here to chase the Minnesota dream of bettering my situation and making something of myself.
Okay, wonderful.
It's working so far.
Working so far.
So far,
All
so
right.
good.
Good. So you got a packet in the mail advising you that you were going to be coming in for jury service.
Yes, sir.
When you opened that packet, what was your just initial reaction? And whatever it is, just let us know.
It was a little bit of a kind of a shock, just moving here recently, like I was saying, wow, out of all the people, me, kind of
Right.
wow, okay. So I just started glancing over it and stuff and just seeing, what I was getting myself into, I guess you could say.
Right. Well, obviously, you learned that you were being summoned in a high-profile case.
I read that there was the potential of it, but I was like, the likelihood of me getting chosen for that, I didn't think it would be me, or
Sure.
I'd make it to this point.
Okay. But you got a questionnaire that you filled out, and it was obviously about this case.
Yes, sir.
And before you filled out that questionnaire, you were aware of what happened in the case.
Yes, I was aware of it.
Right. And I'm assuming that's from like media coverage.
Just the media coverage, what was going on in the media and what had taken place after the, kind of the butterfly effect, you could say.
Sure. I just want to look at one thing here. Okay. So once you kind of read over that questionnaire and started, thinking about the possibility that you could be here today, what was your reaction? Did it change?
It changed a little bit. I think things got more serious for me. And then once I was filling it out to the best of my knowledge, I was just trying to be as unbiased as possible and just, give it direct, straightforward answers on how I feel or my experience with the questions that were asked in the documents.
Okay. All right. Can you think of a situation, whether it be in your personal life or your professional life, where you have been called upon to resolve a conflict between two people?
Like you were saying earlier with social activities, guys getting into it with each other and stuff, sometimes you just try to de-escalate it, break it up, or, just make sure it doesn't get to the point where, there's no going back, I guess you could say, or do something you might regret.
Sure. So let me expand on that a little bit, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
You would agree that not all disagreements necessarily become physical in their nature?
Not all disagreements do need to become physical, but in a situation where defense becomes your only way out, I do believe in self-defense.
Sure. I guess what I'm asking is, have you ever just simply, two friends are having an argument?
Yeah.
And it's not physical, it's, what's the best color, right?
Yeah,
Or whatever, right? Insert any mundane detail. And they're arguing about it, right?
Yes.
And they turn to you and they say, juror number 4, although they wouldn't call you juror number 4, they'd say, what do you think? How do we resolve this dispute between you? Can you think of a situation like that?
Well, I'd give him my personal opinion, and I guess if it's three's the number, if it's a 2-to-1 deal, or if my opinion's different than theirs, then now all three of us are in disagreement.
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, not every time you're going to come to a solid agreement in a situation.
All right. I'm going to come back to that in just a second here.
Yes,
but-
sir.
But how about a situation where you've got two friends that are describing, or two people you know, or two acquaintances, and they're describing a certain situation. And person number one is saying, this is what happened. And person number two is saying, no, that's not what happened. This is what has happened. How do you determine which of those two people is telling the truth?
It would depend who could back up their rebuttal with facts.
Okay.
I stick to the facts, and if they could back that up with facts and proof, there's proof in the pudding. By all
Okay.
means, then their argument's going to be a lot stronger, in my opinion, than the guy who's just sticking to his opinion.
Okay. Do you think that there are certain things or certain, I guess, tools, so to speak, that you can apply to that analysis to determine if there, let's assume it's a situation where it's not on videotape, or it's not, there's no hard evidence, right? How do you resolve that dispute between two people? It gets more difficult, right?
It does get more difficult when there's no evidence and you're just kind of taking the good word of somebody. I guess character comes into play, and if you have any previous experience with that person, there's that old saying, a spade's a spade. If a guy's a liar, he lies 10 out of 10 times, He might just lie to you again.
Right.
And you'd be naive to think otherwise, I think.
Sure. And so let me just, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot. I get
No,
that
no,
this is awkward, but
Yeah.
so as I understand what you're saying is you have a dispute that you're trying to resolve. You're going to look first for, facts and evidence, right? And if those facts and evidence don't exist, you're going to kind of go on your experience and with the person's character.
With the person's character, and if it's quite obvious, the guy's telling me the sky's blue, it's a little bit more believable than a guy telling me, it's red or something,
Okay.
or just, it just kind of all depends on the situation and the, scenario.
Right. So there are certain things that you can see for yourself,
Absolutely.
and you can make a determination based on that, right?
Yes, I have the ability to think for myself.
Right. Sky's blue.
Sky's blue.
Right. Okay. You understand that in this scenario, it's not a 2-to-1, it's not a 10-to-2, it's a unanimous decision that has to be made one way or another. Do you understand that?
Yes.
Okay. And what if you found yourself in a situation where you were the odd man out? You were the only person, right, that disagreed with the rest of the group. How do you deal with that?
I stick to my guns, and just saying, I'm going to stick to what I believe is right,
Okay.
In my heart and what I feel, and that's what I'm going to go with.
Okay. And so if you were in that situation, would you be willing to listen to what the other people are saying?
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
Would you be willing to re-examine your personal opinions?
Definitely. I mean, yeah, I'm always open ears, and willing to, look at something again,
Okay.
It's like that saying, measure twice, cut once.
What if you have to measure 10 times?
Measure 10 times,
What about 100 times?
measure 100 times, get it right the first time.
Okay. Can you think of a situation, again, in your personal or professional life where you were just 100% convinced of something, and then later it turns out you were wrong?
I think, if I could have a moment to just think.
Yeah, take your time.
I can't think of an exact moment, but there has been times in life where, I've made a judgment and I was wrong, based on facts.
Okay, and that, I mean, that's an honest answer, I appreciate it.
Yeah, I mean, that occurs in day-to-day life, you know, sometimes you're not always gonna be right.
Right, okay. And are you able to acknowledge when you're not right?
Oh, absolutely, yeah, definitely.
Okay. So I'm going to ask you a few questions, follow-ups on your questionnaire, if you don't mind.
Not at all.
All right, so I'm going to skip forward a little bit, and you referenced it in your, in an earlier answer you gave me too. You have some training in the martial arts, kickboxing?
Yes, sir, I've done a little bit of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and I've done some Muay Thai, some striking.
Okay. And how long have you practiced that?
I did it for about a year, mostly of the striking. Did some Jiu-Jitsu for about 2 months.
Okay. And did you achieve a certain level?
I was about one test away from getting my green sash. I was orange sash in Muay Thai. And then with the whole COVID thing that happened, when it took like full effect towards January or so, I became full-blown to working instead of attending the gym, and I just never went back to accomplish that.
Okay. Is it something you want to go back to?
Yeah, definitely. It's a good hobby, and I enjoy it.
Okay. So, reflecting back to an earlier question, the questionnaire asks you if what you had heard or knew about the facts of this particular case. And something in your response struck me is you said the cop performed an illegal tactic with his knee across the neck.
Yes, in the video it looks like his knee is a little high. So with that being said, isn't the tactic supposed to be knee across like the shoulder blades?
So that's obviously one of the things that we're going to be discussing throughout the course of the trial, right?
Yes, sir.
So, but you used an interesting word in your response, which was an illegal move, right? What standard would you be applying in terms of the legality of a move?
Well, I guess the black and white fine print of, I guess, what they, to my knowledge, what would be in their, you know, well, I don't want to call it a handbook or their training.
Okay.
You know, from what I was just seeing in the news and stuff, and then just seeing, you know, the video from the angle that was showed on the news, it does look a little rough, in my opinion.
Okay, and that's, I appreciate your honesty, okay? So I guess my question is that you will hear evidence, if you are seated on this jury, you will hear evidence from people in the Minneapolis Police Department about their training and their train their officers. That may be different from your personal training.
Oh yeah, if I, you know, if they could educate me on what the fine print is in a situation like that, I'd be open ears to hearing that, and I would feel more educated myself, and that might change my opinion on what occurred that day.
Okay. So I want to make sure that what you would apply would be the Minneapolis Police Department's standards versus your personal experience being trained in jiu-jitsu. You would do that?
I would do that.
Okay. You said in your response that it may change your opinion of what happened. It's fair to say you formed an opinion of what happened here in this case.
There is a little bit of opinion. I believe it could have been handled differently. I believe the outcome could have happened a lot more, you know, there could have been a different outcome in my opinion.
Okay. The questionnaire asks for your perspective on Mr. Chauvin, and you indicated it was a very negative opinion.
I would say what I've seen, yes, I formed I wouldn't say very negative, but I would say the way he handled that situation struck me as very negative.
Okay.
But like I said, if I'm, you know, more evidence and I'm educated more on the situation, I would feel better myself too about the opinion I'm creating of him, because I know nothing about this man.
Okay. Well, what you wrote in your questionnaire, and I understand, I'm not trying to trick you, but what you wrote in what your questionnaire is, that they took the law into their own hands.
Well, yeah, if a guy's, sitting there telling you can't breathe and, you decide, a man ultimately lost his life that day. And so, earlier I was hearing that you have the right to, a trial and stuff. He didn't make his, court date.
Okay.
His fate was decided on the street that day, unfortunately, due to either, the certain circumstances. I'm not too sure of the evidence and everything, but, ultimately his fate was decided that day.
So you formed an opinion as to the guilt or innocence of Mr. Chauvin at this point?
No.
Okay. And you're telling us that you're willing to examine all of the evidence in this case, right?
I think I'd feel a lot better about the whole situation if I was to examine more evidence and become more educated on the situation, because as of right now, I do have sort of a negative opinion on what happened that day. But like you said, there's gonna be times in life where you are wrong, and you face the music, and I'd be,
So if after reviewing all of the evidence, you formed the opinion that what happened that day was not a crime, you could vote not guilty?
If the facts, the evidence show that what he did that day was proper policing, and there was other circumstances that caused that fatal incident, and there's other things that tied into it, and that was the sole reason that that man lost his life on the street that day, and the evidence backs and supports it, I'd be willing to support what's right at the end of the day. But, if it sways the other way, and the evidence shows that there was improper policing, and that was the sole reason that he didn't see his court date, what's right is right, and what's wrong is wrong.
Okay. One of the questions in the questionnaire asks you about whether you believe that this incident has had a positive or negative effect on the community?
From what I've seen in the media coverage and talking to people who've lived here for many years, I wouldn't say true. The issue that happened had a very negative effect on the community itself. Some people might have had their own agendas tied to, the whole movement that did occur, but it definitely didn't help with the community.
Okay. You also indicated that you have previously seen police engaged in activity that would be more force than needed. And you wrote, I have seen officers be very aggressive. They can be verbally abusive.
Yes.
Can you explain or tell us what you saw?
Well, even growing up as a younger kid, I've seen officers, get verbally aggressive and stuff, and just be a little bit more forceful than they should, But that's not every officer, at the end of the day, each individual is their own individual, but,
Okay. So can you give me a specific example of what you've seen?
Well, when I was younger, I've had some run-ins with cops, and they weren't too nice to us, they thought of us as punk teenagers, so I've had a couple incidents, but that was in Southern California, but, just a couple verbal exchanges and stuff, Okay.
And do you have a general perception of police in general?
Well, I think there's good cops, and, to say that there isn't bad cops, that would be a very, I think there's good and bad, There's some people who abuse their authority, and there's some people who, use their authority for the better, and,
Do you have an opinion of the Minneapolis Police Department specifically?
No, not really. I've never dealt with them, so no, not really.
So none of these previous experiences involve the Minneapolis Police Department?
No, sir.
There were some questions about your overall views on the system and how the system treats people. Do you recall generally those questions?
Not necessarily, I don't recall, but I know that the system is flawed, in my opinion, you know.
Explain why you think that?
Well, I think, you know, sometimes the punishment doesn't fit the crime, and sometimes, you know, I just feel like it's a broken system, you know. When prisons went private, they became their own private, you know, entity and stuff, and they started profiting off people being incarcerated. I believe it, you know, broke the system a little bit.
Okay. Your Honor, could we have a brief sidebar about something unrelated?
We approach the bench now by doing it over
Okay.
wireless, so
Understandable, I'm new to the whole process.
we're new to this kind of COVID process ourselves.
If I make this happen.
You may.
Thank you, sir. Just very briefly, one last question. Are you familiar with the Northside Boxing Gym?
No, sir, I've never partaked in the Northside Boxing Gym.
Okay. Your Honor, I have no further questions, but I am exercising a peremptory.
All right, thank you. Your Honor, let me make a record.
Oh, all right, hold on. From service on this jury, so what I'd like you to do is make sure you take your mask, and the deputy will escort you out and take whatever materials we need from you. So thank you for your
Okay.
candid answers.
Thank you.
No, we're gonna make it record, yeah. All right, juror number 4 has left. Let's make a record. Mr. Slisher, defense indicated they wanted to do a peremptory and the state mounted a Batson challenge.
Thank you very much, Your Honor. Yes, for the record, the defense has made its peremptory challenge now on its second person of color in the jury pool, and the state has raised a Batson challenge. And it's clear from the record that the juror number 4, identifies self-identifies as Hispanic, as did first juror that was struck by the defense. And when asked to provide a race-neutral explanation for the exercise of the peremptory, the defense, and I'll let them speak for themselves, but articulated just sort of a generalized concern that this particular prospective juror expressed strong opinions and believed and articulated a belief that he was simply trying to get on the jury. But there's really no objective evidence of that. There's nothing in what the prospective juror said that would support a conclusion that he held strong beliefs. I believe that the juror said exactly the opposite, and that whatever beliefs or opinions he may have had, he was unequivocally willing to set those opinions aside and judge the case based solely on the evidence, or in his words, on the black and white. And further, expressing the opinion that he would have no problem setting those beliefs aside and deciding the case based on the facts and the evidence and the law. Now, I draw the parallel between juror number 4, who's Hispanic, and juror number 2, who's self-identified as Caucasian or white. Their answers with respect to these questions that were raised by defense counsel are markedly similar, if not the same. And the characteristics are very much the same too. Both expressed a belief that they would decide a case based on the facts and on the evidence. Both described experiences in which they believe they were subjected to some aggressive police conduct when they were younger, but one results in a preemptory strike and the other does not. I understand that the motion from the court has been denied, but I do persist in the challenge.
Mr. Nelson?
Thank you, Your Honor. Your Honor, first and foremost, the law requires me to state a race-neutral reason for striking this particular juror. I disagree that the juror did not articulate strongly held opinions. He specifically referenced in his questionnaire illegality of certain moves, certain tactics. He stated that he had formed the opinion that these officers had taken the law into their own hands, and that he had formed opinions about what had happened. Yes, this juror indicated that he was willing to re-examine those opinions, but only upon essentially providing him evidence and proof contrary to his opinions, is the way I understood him to say that. I think the difference between this particular juror and the prior juror is that the prior juror had not watched the video. He had limited his intentional exposure. He came at it from a very analytical perspective in terms of science and things of that nature. He had no preconceived opinions whatsoever. That's a significant difference between these jurors. The second reason, Your Honor, is that this juror has a specific training, and I was concerned in part that his training or his belief that in martial arts training that this was an illegal move was concerning, and it struck me as insincere. His statements that he would be willing to re-examine the evidence struck me as insincere.
As far as the Batson factors, the fact that these are 2 Hispanic jurors who were struck, I think, establishes at least a prima facie case to go forward. But at the same time, the defense has provided a race-neutral reason for its strike. I disagree with the state. These 2 jurors, number 4 and number 2, are not the same in how they approached. I think Mr. Nelson established how juror number 2 was much more scientific, more not involved in the case. I'll be honest, at one point in the voir dire, I realized the defense would probably strike him. That reason was not because of his race, but because when he was talking about his jiu-jitsu experience and his experience with a hold, is that he obviously might stick to his own opinions about being essentially an expert in the jury room, but more importantly, he stated it in a way that made it clear that he was going to stick to his opinion until somebody else told him otherwise or provided proof otherwise, which essentially is shifting the burden onto the defense and not coming in with the presumption of innocence. And so as soon as he stated in that terms that this was improper policing, this is my opinion, but if you can tell me otherwise, that's not the presumption of innocence. That's holding on to an opinion. And so it may not be for cause, but I think it is appropriate and a race-neutral reason for striking the juror. So anything further to add to the record from the state or from the defense?
Your Honor, respecting the court's ruling, I would just simply caution that in terms of strikes for specialized knowledge, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu specifically, that will result in a striking a disproportionate number of Hispanic people who would be more inclined to train in that particular discipline than other types of martial arts.
It's not that, and I didn't say that. It's not specifically that he has jiu-jitsu training. It's whether or not he would be the expert and whether he has an opinion that he is not willing to put aside. What I heard him say is he has the opinion, he's going to carry it into the courtroom, and you have to essentially convince him otherwise. That's not the presumption of innocence. That's not putting aside your opinion and your training. If he had come in and said, yeah, I know this is one thing, but I'm willing to listen to what the evidence is and decide on the evidence, not on what my personal opinion is. I think it's a fine distinction, but an important one. So accordingly, I'm not sure that's even true, but I'll accept your word that such training would impact people of Hispanic background. So that's a new fact for me.
Thank you, Your Honor.
All right.
Understand the court's ruling.
All right, let's do our next juror, please. Number 5, or what number is it? 8. 8. Hey, have a seat.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, and we are afternoon now. You are juror number 8, is that correct?
That is correct.
All right, and if you can make sure you're right close to the microphone, that'd be appreciated.
Okay.
First thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna swear you in to make sure that all our answers are under oath. So if you can
Okay.
raise your right hand.
Okay.
Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that that you will truthfully answer all questions about your qualifications to serve as a juror?
I do.
All right. Couple things, you filled out a questionnaire, thank you for taking the time to do that. Now that you've had a chance maybe to reflect on something, is there anything that, well, first of all, was everything true on the questionnaire?
Yes.
Is there anything that you wanted to add or modify? Because sometimes when you reflect on what you put in there, you might think, I probably should have mentioned this, or or maybe changed an answer here, and that's just fine, because that's just the way, the dynamic of writing something up and then thinking about it some more. Is there anything like that that you can think of on the questionnaire?
Not that I can think of.
Okay. Now, the questionnaire advised that you weren't supposed to read any articles. You have some knowledge of the case from the media before you got your summons, is that correct?
Yes. Yes.
Oh, okay. And you've listed that in your questionnaire. Since you've gotten the questionnaire which advised you to avoid media, have you had any occasion to be exposed to anything about this case? Specifically, you know, maybe you saw a headline inadvertently, or somebody said, oh, did you know something about this case? And essentially, despite your best efforts, you were exposed to between the questionnaire and now as you sit here.
Yes.
Okay, and what was that?
Well, it would be some of the news that I've watched. Also, there will be something in regard to that on the news.
Okay, and what substantively did you remember hearing or seeing about the case?
Really, it wasn't too much substance. It was more that you know, the case, the trial was going to be coming up, and this and that, and I don't, you know, I don't recall anything substantial.
Okay, so anything about the process or the lawyers or the parties, anything that you learned about?
No.
Okay.
No.
Now, you've got to decide this case, if you are a juror, only on what you hear in the courtroom. You understand that? Do you think you could do that? Because you've got, as most people do now, they come in here having some knowledge about the case. And the question is, do you have some knowledge about the case? Is, have you formed certain opinions that you cannot put aside because of the case? Or certain facts you can ignore? You have to put everything outside and just decide on with the evidence you hear, according to the law that I give you. Do you think you could do that?
Yes.
All right. The lawyers will probably follow up on that as well. You were given a long list of witnesses who might testify in this trial. Did you recognize any witnesses on the list?
No.
All right. And as far as the length of trial, any concerns there?
No.
Okay. Basically, it comes down to one of the questions we ask, which is, can you put everything aside and decide this case in a fair and impartial manner? And I think you said your answer was yes. Is that still true?
Yes.
All right. I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Nelson then for further inquiry. Mr. Nelson.
Thank you, Judge. Good afternoon, juror number 8.
Good afternoon.
My name is Eric Nelson again. I'm just going to ask you a few questions. If there's anything I ask you that you don't understand or ask me to repeat, please let me know.
Okay.
And also, just as a reminder, we do need to use, words as opposed to verbal or nonverbal nods, shakes of the head, things of that nature. Is that okay?
Okay.
All right. First of all, I'm just going to ask you a series of questions in terms of yourself, get to know you a little bit better, and then I'm going to follow up on some of your questions in the questionnaire.
You can also take off your mask.
Oh, I can't? Okay. Good. Thank you.
Thank you. I didn't feel that was my prerogative to tell. So my first question for you is, if you and I were to meet under different circumstances, what are a couple of things about yourself that you would want me to walk away knowing about you?
Well, I think that it'd be that I'm kind. I think that I'm fair. I'm a family man. I'm a
Okay.
Christian.
Okay. You received a jury duty notice in the mail,
Yes.
and when you first opened that notice, what was your initial reaction?
I've never been called for jury duty before, so I thought, well, this is my time. So, I've known people that have served on jury duty, and typically it's like a 2-week process. So I thought, okay, well, that's it's my time to serve on jury duty.
Okay. When you learned that it was in connection with this case, did that change your perspective?
A little bit. Just my feeling was that it was going to be most likely longer than a 2-week period.
Okay. You note in your questionnaire that you have some concerns about safety and things of that nature.
Yes.
Did those concerns come up as a result of being called on this particular case?
Yes.
How did you feel when you came to court today or yesterday and you saw the current status of the Hennepin County Government Center?
It just represented to me the seriousness of the case, and that potentially there could be some protests or demonstrations, and the government center, the county was taking the necessary precautions to try to prevent that.
Okay. Did it make you feel better about coming to serve jury duty in this case? Or did it make you more concerned for your safety?
More concerned for my safety.
How did that impact you?
Well, just being more cautious and more alert, and just recognizing the seriousness of this case.
Okay. And you had, you heard the judge's instruction this morning that your name would not be released, and we're trying very hard not to release any identifying information about you through this process. Mm-hmm. Did that make you feel better or worse?
Yeah, no, that made me feel better.
Okay. Would you be concerned that your name were ever released to the public?
Yes, could be, yep.
Right. Is there, I know that this isn't up to you, but if there was a magic amount of time that needed to pass between the verdict in this case and when your name was released, how long do you think that would be to make you feel safer?
Probably 6 months.
Okay. So, again, without identifying the company that you work for, I understand you're in management of a company?
Yes.
Okay. In your role, and you also have some children as well, adult children?
Yes.
Okay. So in your role as a parent or in business, Can you think of a circumstance in which you've been called upon to resolve a dispute or a conflict between two people?
Yes.
Okay. Generally speaking, can you just tell me, how do you resolve that dispute between two people?
Well, in business, it would be talking to both people. I mean, getting the person aside, and usually there'd be another, in this case, human resource person with me, and you would hear what the one person had to say about the incident, and then you'd interview us at a separate time the other person and hear what they had to say, and then try to put together what the situation to the best of your knowledge was.
Okay. Are there other tools at your disposal within the workplace that you could go back and check or look for other evidence that supports one side or another?
Yes, there'd be other people that, if it was an incident, if they could, you could have people that maybe had witnessed it or seen it that you would also talk to.
Okay. And in your, would you do that as a part of your analysis or investigation in resolving this dispute?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So assume there's a situation where two people are telling you two different things, and there are no other witnesses, and there are no videos or time cards or other objective data available, right? Maybe this is more applicable to your kids. How do you resolve that dispute in the absence of information?
Well, I would listen to the story from both individuals, reflect on it, try to come back with some ideas on some other questions, and most likely go back to them and talk to them again, saying here's some situations that, or some comments that I have further questions about.
Okay. Can you think of a situation, again, in either your professional life or in your personal life, where you felt that you had decided a situation and you were certain you were right, and then it later turns out you were wrong?
I'm sure there have been. I can't recollect specific, but I'm sure I made mistakes. Making a decision with the kids or whatever.
How do you view group decision making?
Well, it's it would be a situation where you'd want to get everybody's input and opinion, and then just kind of weigh through the circumstances, try to figure out, was that observation correct or not, or let's have a discussion on it and try to build a consensus.
Okay. In this particular circumstance, it's a unanimous jury verdict would be needed. And how would you approach a situation where you felt one way and other members of the group felt a different way? How would you work towards building that consensus to achieve a unanimous decision?
Well, I would work with the facts. I mean, what the facts are, and try to explain where my what my opinion would be, and try to have a discussion on where the differences are, and where can we agree on the points, and if there's more questions, try to seek out more information.
Okay, so that raises a good point. Is the information you're going to be provided would occur during the course of the trial? You understand that?
Yes.
And the deliberation process does not allow for you to come back and ask for more information. So where along the spectrum of we need more information, how much information do you need in order to make a decision when you may be looking for something else? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, it's you'd have to work hard at trying to again to lay out the facts, lay out the information, and try to come to an agreement.
Are you the type of person who would be willing to re-examine your own beliefs, your own opinions, in order to achieve that consensus?
Yeah, I mean, I would certainly evaluate my, my facts or the basis for my information. I could, I could go back and reflect and analyze that, yes.
Okay. And likewise, if you were just 100% convinced I'm right, would you necessarily just agree with someone just to get it over with, kind of?
No.
Okay. Do you have any concerns about serving as a juror in light of COVID?
No.
Okay. So I'm going to ask you and follow up with a few questions about answers in your questionnaire, if that's okay. And I understand you haven't read it in a while. I'll do my
Yes.
best to refresh
Couple
your
months,
recollection.
yes.
So there's a question that asks about what you had heard about the situation, what you had read, etc., and whether you had formed an impression of Mr. Chauvin in this particular case. Do you recall that question generally?
Generally, yes.
And would you disagree if I told you that you answered that you had formed a very negative opinion of Mr. Chauvin?
Was that my answer?
Yes.
Okay.
And that you said that you had formed an opinion that Mr. Chauvin had used excessive force in this particular case.
Yes.
Okay. Obviously, that's an issue in this particular case. Do you understand that?
Yes.
Do you still hold that same opinion today that you did back when you filled out this questionnaire?
I would say yes.
Okay, and that's fine. I appreciate your honesty. But I guess your ultimate role as a juror in this particular case would be to hear all of the evidence. Agreed?
Yes, yep,
Yep.
yes, absolutely.
And you would need to hear from, just like any other dispute, there are two sides.
Yes,
Are you willing to listen to the entirety of the evidence?
yes,
Are you willing to base your decision on that evidence as it's presented in court?
yes,
Are you willing to give up that opinion that this was excessive force if evidence were to be presented that convinced you otherwise?
yes,
And I believe with respect to Mr. Floyd in this particular case, you really had a neutral impression of him, didn't have a whole lot of information about him. Would that be fair?
that's correct.
I believe you said, recognize that there was some past employment, some past issues, but otherwise you hadn't formed any opinion.
That's correct.
Is there anything that has changed about that opinion since you filled out this?
No,
Okay. Still view him in a neutral light?
yes,
Good. The questionnaire asks you again that whether you had talked about Mr. Floyd's death with your family, friends, coworkers, discussed it online, and you checked yes that you had, right?
yes,
And that's understandable, right?
yes,
But specifically, you stated that you, in that context, you felt that the officers used excessive force again.
yes,
And so in the course of those discussions and sharing your opinions with your friends, family members, coworkers, that was the opinion that you shared with them.
yes,
And again, are you willing to re-examine that same opinion?
yes, I am.
You were asked a question about the effect of the protests that occurred after Mr. Floyd's death and the impact that you had, that they had on this community. Do you remember that?
Yes, vaguely, yes,
You indicated that it was that you felt, and I'll just read your writing, definitely negatively. I have friends who have moved out of their condos in downtown Minneapolis. My wife and I have no desire to go out in downtown Minneapolis. Does that answer in any way affect your ability to be impartial about this case?
no,
I mean, understanding that Minneapolis is a much different place than it was 9 months ago, 10 months ago, do you think that you can set aside your fear of Minneapolis or your concern about the riots and be a neutral, objective juror in this case?
Yes.
Now, one interesting answer that you provided is that you were asked the question, have you ever personally seen the police use more force than was necessary? You checked no. But again, you answered for the third time about the excessive force used in this George Floyd video. So it sounds to me, and this is what I just need to understand, sounds to me as that you had formed a very strong opinion about what you saw in that video.
Yes.
And you've watched the video numerous times, right?
Yes.
So, I mean, it was obviously of concern to you throughout the time when you were filling out this questionnaire that you had a pretty strong opinion.
Yes.
And do you persist in that opinion as you sit here today?
Yes.
But what you're telling us is that you would be able, specifically, to judge this case based upon the facts and evidence as presented in this case.
Yes.
There was a series of questions that had like a strongly agree, strongly disagree series of questions. You remember those generally?
Kind of generally, yes.
And it seems to me that you have a belief that people of color are treated differently by the system than people who are not of color.
No, I mean, I think there can be, or there is racism demonstrated, but I think that the system itself would treat people equally, whether the judge or the jury or whatever. Racism can come into place there, but the system, I would say no. I don't feel that the system is unequal.
So one of the questions, for example, is that police in this country treat whites and blacks equally, and you strongly agreed with that?
I would agree, yes, that the system does, but I also understand there is racism overtones and actions by people.
Is it that you feel the media conflates or exaggerates the problem?
Yes, I think they do.
You also had some pretty negative views on the Black Lives Matter movement.
Yes.
Would you care to expand on those more?
Sure. I mean, Black Lives Matter, absolutely. As far as the Black Lives Matter movement, I've done some research and I've read some articles and this and that. As far as the organization or the politics, I have some misgivings about some of the platforms that they emphasize.
Okay. And you also have some stronger opinions about Blue Lives Matter as well.
Yes.
And those are very favorable opinions, right?
Yes.
Would you agree that this case is not about either one of those causes?
Yes.
Can you set aside your opinions about those particular causes? And again, judge this case on the evidence and the facts in this case?
Yes.
Do you feel that the way this manner has proceeded has alleviated some of your concerns about your personal safety and your family's safety, would you feel comfortable serving on this jury?
Yes?
I'm going to ask you one other question is if I gave you a checkbook and it was unlimited in its resources, and you had to write a check to fix what you perceive to be the problem with the judicial system, where would you write that? Where would you send that check to?
Well, the George Floyd family,
Okay. And why?
because it's a loss. I mean, it was a loss to, to that family, and it wouldn't make up, the check wouldn't make up for the loss, but I guess that's my opinion of where I would write it.
And how about more broadly speaking, in terms of if that check was to be written to fix something that's broken in the system, where would that check be sent to?
I would say probably, police, maybe training or reform, procedures.
Your Honor, may I have a moment?
Do you want to continue now, Your Honor? I think it'll be a while.
All right. It is 12:30. Actually, I would, because we've got another group of jurors coming at 1 o'clock, so if you don't mind, sir, we're gonna keep going.
Sure, no, that's fine, that's fine.
Actually, let's do a sidebar first. Well, I've changed my mind. I think what I'm gonna do is give you a chance to go back to the jury lounge. Everybody here has been at it since 8 a.m.
Okay, yeah.
So we wanna give them a lunch break. We actually, because you're gonna be held over, we have a lunch for you.
Okay.
So you and the other juror who's waiting.
Yep.
So we'll have you return to that
Okay.
room and we'll bring you back out probably at 1:30.
Okay.
All right,
All right.
thank you all. All right, we're in recess till 1:30.